reduce carbon emissions 25% by 2030. 100% of packaging recyclables. Return 100% plus of water used in drinks. What are those? Those are the sustainability goals of Coca-Cola. Now, there are many large companies around the world who have very aggressive sustainability goals that they've put out there, but is it all lip service to try and sell more of their product? Is anybody holding them accountable or keeping track of if they're actually hitting those targets? We're going to be answering all of those questions in today's video. Let's jump right into it. Hey everybody, my name is Eli, and today we are going to be talking about sustainability linked loans. I'll give you a description of what they are, kind of talk about the history of how they came about, talk about some of the benefits and drawbacks, and then also some of my own thoughts about them. So first, what are they? What are sustainability linked loans? So obviously it's a loan, right? Got that part of it figured out. So it's a loan with a variable interest rate based off of sustainability performance. So when the loan is originated, they set up the terms to say this interest rate will vary based off of these targets that you said you're going to hit. So let's take Coca-Cola's 25% by 2030. This loan, and I have no insight into how this loan actually works. This is all speculation. But let's say every year they have these kind of milestones, right? So by 2030, they're supposed to reduce 25%. I don't know where they set their benchmark. Let's say it's 2010. So they're comparing all their numbers now, their carbon emissions, to 2010. And they're saying, okay, we're going to reduce these by 25% by 2030. So maybe in 2022, instead of it being 25%, maybe they had a 15% target. So by 2022, their target was 15%. If they hit that 15%, then they get this percent interest. If they hit only 14%, that interest rate jumps up and you get penalized for not hitting that target. So that's how these loans are originated. Each loan is very unique and kind of has its own constraints. The other important part is these loans are very large amounts of money, talking billions with a B. They are intended to be used for projects, improvements, programs, things like that, that are all related to sustainability and environmental issues. So some of your favorite companies probably have sustainability linked loans around them. For example, here's Mercedes-Benz has an $11 billion sustainability linked loan. Google, $3.5 billion. Walmart, $2 billion. Anheuser-Busch, $10.1 billion. They're out there and they're becoming more and more popular every year. So let's talk about the history of these sustainability linked loans. Where did they come from? How long have they been around? Really, where do they get their roots? Well, they get their roots from the ESG movement. If you don't know what ESG is, it stands for environmental, social, and governance. So what this idea is, it's looking at companies not just based off financials, but kind of a holistic picture of how well they're doing with the environment, social reasons, and also with governmental. ESG started becoming popular in the 60s and 70s, and then the first ESG mutual fund actually came out in 1971. It's called Pax World Fund. That fund was started kind of in response to the Vietnam War. So there was a group of actually Methodist ministers or Methodist churches that wanted to get together and not invest in companies that were supporting the Vietnam War. At this time, they started, that was really their focus. So it was a lot around things like weapons, alcohol, tobacco, and poor environmental records. Then kind of the movement has kind of grown and gone through different focuses, let's say. So in the 90s, it was really focused around human rights, labor practices, and then it started getting into diversity and inclusion as well. In the 90s and early 2000s, companies would start being presented an ESG score. So there's a third party that would come in and say, okay, let's look at their data, their values, principles, where are they spending their money, And we're going to give them a score on this. One of the biggest scorers out there is the Morgan Stanley Capital International, the MSCI ratings. These ratings vary from a triple C to a triple A. Triple A being the best, meaning that you are a leader, managing the most significant ESG risk and opportunities, or a triple C, meaning you are lagging behind. High exposure and failure to manage significant ESG risks. So that's kind of in the late 90s, early 2000s, these started really becoming tied to these companies. And then in 2017, Enel, which is an Italian company, signed a 1.5 billion euro loan that was linked to their ability to reduce carbon emissions 25% by 2020. So they had 3 years to achieve this target. This was kind of the first really public loan, or this tie that came out of the interest rate being tied to whether or not they actually hit that target. So that was in 2017, and in 2019 there was around $60 billion in sustainability linked loans, and then in 2022 it was estimated around 1.3 trillion. Yeah, with a T. $1.3 trillion tied to sustainability linked loans. What are the benefits? Is this actually a good thing, a bad thing? Let's talk through those. So some of the benefits of these sustainability linked loans is it encourages environmental performance, right? It's really holding these companies accountable, making them put their money where their mouth is. So companies know if they say, look at us, we have these goals of reducing our carbon emissions 25%, that's going to sell more of their product. So these sustainability linked loans really encourages companies to follow through on what they said they're doing. Another benefit to the companies is they can get really advantageous financing for this, keeping that interest rate very low based off of these sustainability performances. Another aspect, a benefit for these companies, because these loans need to be tied to these sustainability projects, it gives opportunities to invest money in some of those projects. Let's say Coca-Cola wanted to put money into some of their environmental sustainability projects. Well, normally Coca-Cola would, they're going to invest their money in their processes, or in their can lines or packaging, things like that, which are going to give them a much better return on investment. But typically a sustainability project, you're not going to get great return on investment. It's going to be years and years down the road that you'll get those kind of payoffs. So these sustainability linked loans, because they're directly tied to that, and you can get that advantageous financing, it gives companies an opportunity to say, yep, we're going to go after these projects right here. And then, the other benefit is it does attract investors. What I was talking about, people being able to say, this is a company that's actually putting their money where their mouth is. It can increase sales if they make those, public and really want to promote and talk about what it is that they're doing. Now, let's talk about some of the drawbacks of sustainability linked loans. The number one drawback is their complexity. There's not a great standardization of sustainability linked loans, and so each one kind of is unique and has its own restrictions and exactly how the loan is structured. So just kind of the complexity and the lack of standardization. Other part is it can be kind of a greenwashing. Companies can say that they're going to do these things, but are they actually making a positive impact on the environment, or running the numbers to say, oh, look at us, we did this thing, but it's not actually, making a sustainable improvement. For example, let's say, I know I keep using Coca-Cola, but their target of reducing carbon emissions by 25% by 2030. Well, what does that 25% mean? So let's say their benchmark was 2010, and let's just say they put out 100 trillion tons of CO2. Well, is that what the loan is tied to? Is that total number of CO2 emissions, or is it based off of some volumetric output? So maybe it's, I don't know, 1 1 pound of CO2 per can of Coca-Cola. Maybe it's a ratio like that. And they're saying, no, that's the number that we're going to reduce. So maybe their volume has gone up tenfold since then, but that number of, being more efficient, is it just based off of a volume ratio? And because volume has gone up, maybe they're actually, instead of 100 trillion tons of CO2, maybe that number is doubled, and it's actually the total output is 200 trillion tons of CO2, but because it's on a volumetric rate or a volumetric ratio, that they actually have not reduced total CO2 emissions. So that's what it can kind of be, this greenwashing, where companies they understand what they're getting into. So for example, Mercedes-Benz, and again, I have no idea what the details of any of these sustainability linked loans are. Let's say Mercedes-Benz, one of their conditions for their loan was their percent of their fleet that is electric vehicles. Let's say in the future, Mercedes-Benz makes an awful electric vehicle. Nobody wants to buy it compared to Teslas and whatever else is out there. And Mercedes, just nobody is buying their electric vehicle. Well, Mercedes-Benz may still make a ton of these electric vehicles just to offset so they can hit their target for their fleet that is electric vehicles, even though these vehicles aren't actually being sold. Because here's how the math works out, right? Let's say the interest rate can change by 0.1%. So it doesn't seem that much, but on an $11 billion loan, that's $11 million. So it could definitely be worth it for Mercedes-Benz to make hundreds of these electric vehicles, and the cost of making them would offset by being able to hit your target. That's one of these scenarios that could potentially play out in the future. And it's the same for all of these sustainability linked loans. So that's where I think one of their drawbacks is kind of this greenwashing. I think because there's not great standardization of what it is they're measuring and kind of how they're drawn up, and they can be very complex, right? And companies know how to work these numbers so that they can show off that, yeah, look, we hit our carbon emissions, but was it actually good? Well, there's two other drawbacks that I have. One, right, for the same reason why you could draw investors to potentially invest in your company because you're going after these sustainability projects, there's also a group of investors that will not invest in companies if they know that the company is not just based off of the financials. Because, right, one of the things of investing in companies is you're investing in them because you're trying to make a return on your money. And so there's some investors who will say, I see they're involved in these ESG loans. I think they're going to make bad business decisions based off of being involved in those, so I don't want to invest in that company. The biggest drawback is for companies, right? If you don't hit that target, you're going to bump up your interest rate. So it could end up costing you a lot of money. So if it's not something you're fully committed to going after these projects, then you should also stay away from these loans. Because, like I said, a 0.1% interest rate change could be $11 million. So it's a huge impact. Now, wrapping up, all of this being said, what are my personal thoughts on these sustainability linked loans? Right. One, I think they can create some issues within a company, right? Because these are global companies. So Walmart's stores that they have all around the United States, if they're going after these sustainability projects, maybe some of these projects in places like, let's say, if water is one of their metrics that they're using to adjust these interest rates. Well, water prices here in Colorado are very cheap compared to many places in California. It can be as much as 10 times more expensive for water in California than here in Colorado. So some of these global policies or these global decisions that these companies are making their impact on the local stores, sites, whatever it is. It's interesting how those financials work out, and it's something that each individual site has to take into consideration, but at the same time, they have to make their own financials work. Another consideration for these companies is how the market demand and conditions can change. So kind of what I said about this Mercedes-Benz example. If companies sign up for these $11 billion loans and market conditions change, maybe what your strategic plan and what you envisioned was going to happen, something completely different. Let's say a global virus shows up and totally changes how people live their lives. Well, if you had a sustainability linked loan, that could drastically be affected by that. In conclusion, I think we'll see them continue to grow, right? This year it was $1.3 trillion. I think that number will steadily climb, but we'll also start seeing how some of these loans, what's actually happening to these companies, and are they able to meet these sustainability goals, right? The world in 2030 or 2050, some of those that go out really far, who knows what the world is going to look like at that point. As companies come back with their data and say, okay, here's what happened with our finances because of these projects or these things that we were tied to, I think that'll really determine the fate of these. The other really large aspect of this is what's going to happen within the government situations, right? If government is already subsidizing a lot of these environmental projects, then these companies don't need to go get a private loan through a bank and to try and work these things off. So, in that case, it's the taxpayers who are paying for it. I hope today you learned a little bit more about sustainability linked loans. And when you see companies with these environmental sustainability targets saying that they're going to reduce carbon emissions or improve recycling or whatever it is, maybe it'll make you think twice about what it is that they're saying. And maybe you'll start exploring, okay, are these companies, who's holding them accountable? So thank you very much for watching. And if you like more videos about energy or anything like that, those kind of topics, subscribe, like this video, and I'll see you on the next one.